because it is, after all about justice. For people like Stanley Katz, it was important that they go fight not only to defend the Republic, which had given them freedom, but also to free 2 continents of people who were getting tortured and killed when the United States actually wouldn't do it. You know, we had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the Second World War. We tried desperately to stay out of it. As I think the President of the United States says, well, I hate war, Eleanor hates war, the dog hates war, everybody hates war. So we're not going to fight, we're going to let, and I think just months before the Japanese attack, Roosevelt said that that Asian and European boys will fight to defend themselves. We're not going to do it. But there were lots of people who thought that was an abomination, including your father. And we wouldn't be here if it weren't for people like that, like your father and my father, and all the families who contributed to the defense of the Republic. I grew up in New York City right after the war. Matter of fact, my father didn't see, I was born just before the war ended. I was about 8, 9 months old when my father came home, and he'd never seen me before. I was the last thing he did before he went overseas. And my sister was the first thing he did when he came home. We bracketed them. But in my neighborhood, as in probably your neighborhood, every household had made a contribution to the defense of the Republic, every single one. I had friends who had fathers with bits and pieces missing or were all busted up, like a lot of us were, like your father was. I had friends who had no fathers at all. But it was unseemly not to have made a contribution to the defense of the Republic. And now, I'll reiterate, it's very, very unusual most Americans do not know anybody in uniform. And back in those days, when we were growing up, most Americans did not know a household that had made a contribution to the Republic. It's interesting that you said that your father didn't talk about the war very much, didn't tell you the stories, and you had to sort of discover it, stumble over it, and so on. And I think that's true of anybody who's been in uniform. My father, who served in the South Pacific, was also dragged kicking and screaming. He was at the University of Minnesota studying electrical engineering, and like a lot of people, was just shipped off to go fight. Didn't like the Army very much, certainly didn't like getting shot at, and had nothing but castigation to heap on bureaucracy, on just the notion of military service even after the war. And then when he got to be about my age, that's all he talked about. Talked about the young boys he was with, talked about how proud he was of his service, and the same thing is true of my generation. About 50% of all the people who served in the war in Vietnam were drafted, effectively dragooned into service, and they were just vituperative about it until they got to be about my age. And now every single one of them you talk to is so proud of the fact that he defended the Republic, was in uniform, and that he served, and doesn't think very much of those people who did not. There's something to be said for doing things when you're really, really young, and then being forced to think about them when you're really, really old. It puts everything, the intervening 50 years puts everything in a proper perspective, just like it did for your father, and just like it did for all of his comrades. And they were young people then. Your father was what, 24 when he came into the Army? My father, they called him, he was a sergeant in the Army. They called him the old man. He was 26 because everybody else was 18, 19 years old. When I was decorated, I was 24. I was not quite 25 years old. You take a look at the picture. I look like my bar mitzvah picture is in that book with President Nixon. Now that my face looks like a road map of New Jersey and so on, I walk by, and this happens to a lot of people. I walk past a mirror, and I'm startled because that's my father. And Time flies, it goes too fleetingly, and it's really, really important that because it goes fleetingly, and it's all too soon over, that we pay tribute to those people who brought us here, and that we never forget where we came from or who brought us to this point. And so I wish I knew your father so I could clap him on the back and tell him all the way, and he'd tell me airborne, which is the proper greeting among soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division. I don't know him, but I love him. I love him for what he did and for what he's done for all of us. God bless him, and God bless you too.
Hold on, another one, a little closer. Thank you.
Jack, I'm going to ask you to do one more thing. You and I had a conversation about a charity that you're involved with, Children of Fallen Patriots. And if you just share with all of us what they do.
I'll be brief if I can. I'm never brief. I mean, get up and say, I'll be short, but I'm already short. So there's a young guy, he's not young anymore, his name is David Kim, he's a graduate of West Point, and when he was graduated, his unit was sent to Panama, where they fought, and his platoon sergeant was killed in action. The platoon sergeant left behind 3 children, young children, who eventually, one hopes, would wind up having to go to school, go to college, but they didn't have any father. He was killed in action. And so David decided that he was gonna fund these kids to go to college, and then realized that there were other families who had lost a parent killed in action, and also first responders who'd lost a parent killed on the line of duty. So he formed this charity, Children of Fallen Patriots Foundation, which raises money to send to college the children of people who've been killed in action or first responders killed in the line of duty. Started off with very small checks and have now spent about $17 million sending young people to college who otherwise wouldn't be able to go to school because their parents were dead. So it's my favorite charity, at least partially because it's education. My favorite thing is education. It's the only way you can reach into the future. You want to reach into the future, you got to educate people. And to the extent that we ignore that and we don't educate the next generation, we are forsaking the service and the sacrifice of those people who brought us to this point. Children of Fallen Patriots Foundation.
So I'm all out of material. Stay as long as you want. The golf course is open if anyone's brought their clubs. It would be inappropriate, but I will say that I fought many a battle out there.
And lost.
And lost. And we have some tzedakah boxes for everyone on the way out. And in our family, we've always taught our kids and now our grandchildren about tzedakah. And so what better way to take home a box, give it to your grandchild or yourself, fill it up, and then take that money and send it to this great charity. And remember that because of the people like Jack, my dad, all here who have served, and we live in a great country. Despite what we see on television 24/7, or on the Drudge Report, or on it's the greatest country in the world. And I want to do this day that we just take stock, take a pause from all of our busy activities and just give thanks, and that's what it was. So I thank again to my dad, my mom for what they did for us, and thank all of you for being here. Oh, that's right.
Hey, one more, hold on. Fix your tires, quick. Only a little one.
Say so.
Take care.
It was
Wonderful
great.
day.
Awesome.